So I just put this ridiculous looking headset on, and I'll tell you, if you've not experienced it, it's amazing. It's like you're sitting in the car.
And
Wow.
you don't get, like, nauseous or sick or motion
You
sick
you
in
you
that?
you just got to push through that, Steel.
No.
I did get nauseous for the first probably week, and then there's some techniques that you can do to overcome that nausea. Do short sessions, make sure you're cool, have a fan blowing on you, stop when you feel sick, and then after a week or two, I didn't feel sick anymore, and I can I could do it for hours. I don't do it for hours at a time. I probably do it for an hour at a time, but yeah, it's really really fun.
All right, today's episode of The Wired Garage with Pops, we've got Toby joining Steele and I, and we're going to dive into some career journeys that were shaped by some international assignments, some innovative home tech projects, and in a high-speed sim racing. All kinds of cool stuff there. The first to hit the travel a little bit, you know, the global career brings practical lessons, not just technical stuff, right? About how to adapt to new cultures, solving problems in dynamic environments, different religions, different types of people, different things like that, and building connections that span continents. What was some of the biggest cultural surprises you've encountered when working overseas, and how did you adapt?
Yeah, oh, that's good questions. Just a little bit of background on my international experience first. I spent about a decade overseas in the probably from maybe 2004 to 2013. First in Bangladesh and then second in India. So working experience in both of those countries on the subcontinent. Yeah, opening in a lot of respects. I think one of the things that struck me is that it was a real career accelerator, I think, for me, because I was given opportunities in those environments that I don't think I would have been given had I been back in the States, just from a opportunity perspective for pursuing more senior roles because of the difference in the talent pool. So that was a real it was a benefit, but it was also a real adjustment that had to get made. I had a job as head of IT in Bangladesh for the largest electrical power producer, which, if I was to say that I would have gotten that job back in the US for the largest electrical power producer, it would have never happened at that stage of my career. Right? I would have been, much too junior. Didn't come with a certain degree of, crap, am I over my head with this role? But you learn to adjust. I think one of the from a cultural perspective, Bangladesh is a very homogenous place, unlike India, which I'll talk about in a second. But Bangladesh is a religiously homogenous place, a linguistically homogenous place. I was the one of only two Americans in the company. We had three power stations and the headquarters downtown. And so, all day, every day I was interacting with, folks that were, locals and I wasn't. So that has its own degree of, you know, skepticism. What are you doing here? Why do I have to listen to you? What can you teach me though from a nicer perspective? I think there was plenty of that. I was thinking about one story where things that I never had to think about in IT back in the States were front and center in Bangladesh. For example, at that time, and it may be a little bit different now, but at that time, it was very difficult to import just hardware into the country, right? And so you would have to consider those things, right? And I would when I first got there and kind of took an inventory of where, all the systems sat with IT and what sort of challenges we were facing from that perspective. Something that was fairly typical was, well, no, we don't have any email for a week because the email server died and we couldn't get any, there's no spare parts, right? Nobody's nobody's selling that because we chose to, buy vendor XYZ that isn't available without importing, right? So I had to rethink all of those things. Like, okay, well, we're not going to buy from vendors that don't have a presence in the country anymore.
Right.
And we're going to buy spares so that I have one sitting on the shelf. And I don't care if it costs double because, I'd rather have it than not have it when you need it. So that's one of those kinds of things. Or revamping, ancient technology that we hadn't seen in the US in a long time, satellite internet, right? And we had you know, horrible latency and, just really bad performance and customer or, internal employees rather very frustrated with the way their business applications were responding because, a user at the power station would, enter into the front end system and the signal would have to go up to the satellite and back down to the headquarters office, which was, 50 miles away, but several hundred miles away
Yeah.
in space. So how do we revamp that? What do we need to do to make that situation better? So it presented a lot of interesting opportunities.
Well,
Yeah.
it built your survivalist piece, not only personally, but, business and technically. You had to learn how to be a survivalist, just to get through those days, keep the
Yeah.
systems up and running. A lot harder, like you said, a lot harder than here. We can just go to some hardware store, call, you know, parts area or to order a computer overnighted or same day. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. That doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So just some of the challenges. And then, so a few years of doing that in Bangladesh. And then I moved to India. I worked for an American tech company in Bangalore, which is, the Silicon Valley of India. And India is a much different place, much bigger place, a much more heterogeneous place than Bangladesh was. Just a fantastic experience. I was part of and built a professional services team there, delivering services to customers in Asia and in Europe for a number of years there, and just really enjoyed that experience. From a career perspective, afforded me opportunities that were different and perhaps in some respects above the ones that I would have had at that stage of my career had I stayed at home. Didn't really realize it until I had come back some years later how valuable those things were,
Right. Right.
right? Eh, in coming back to the States, but also, conversely, uh, going over there and bringing the perspective that I had here as an early career professional and the way things are done and could be done or perhaps should be done, but not being too heavy-handed about that, right? Because it wasn't going to do me any good to say, oh, well, that's the way we do it in the US, and why can't we do it that way here? You've got to understand the challenges and the parameters that you're working with and figure out how to make it work. That was really great. And then on a personal level, right, it afforded all sorts of fantastic opportunities to explore a part of the world that I was unfamiliar with. My wife is from that part of the world, so it was great to see it through her eyes. I had my two children over there, and they got to experience the first years of their life in that environment, which, I don't know how much of that the younger one remembers. The older one probably a little bit, but, provide some interesting background for them as they came back to New York.
Just to tag on to that, during the pandemic, you also had a temporary move, right?
I did, yeah. So the pandemic in New York City was a terrifying experience on a lot of levels. I'll start by saying I was very lucky to not have been personally affected. I mean, other than we all got COVID, but many people did. But it was an interesting place to be, but not one that I relished. A location I relished being in with my boys that summer when everything was up in the air and there was no vaccine and nobody knew what was going to happen. So we decamped, as it were, for a few months that summer to my mother's in Montana. So we went from, a tiny New York apartment to
Wide open spaces.
wide open spaces. And the boys got to, run around and drive the tractor and play outside. And, so that was really fantastic. I'm very appreciative of, having family that I could do that with. So for sure.
Speaking of things you brought back besides the family, congratulations. What practices or habits, if any, did you bring back? Is there anything that if you had never had that experience that you wouldn't be doing today?
Man, practices or habits. I think, I've always been a fairly open-minded person for trying new things, right? So even before going there, that was, kind of part of my psyche, but definitely the exposure to, things that I was wholly unfamiliar with, whether, it's food or music or fashion or cultural customs. I'll tell you a funny one. I had to learn to eat slower, right, as a best practice, right? I was a very fast eater, and like many cultures outside of the US, culture on the subcontinent is, very hospitable. You're going to go over to somebody's house and they're just going to pile it on, right? They're going to feed you. And we were going, my wife and I were, fairly newlywed at the time when we lived in Bangladesh, and so I wasn't going someplace where I didn't have, like a lot of other expats, I knew they just came there for a job and, they were going to go back after a few years. I was there with my in laws, right? So I had invitations every night to, dinner parties and this, that, and the other thing. And one of the things that I learned very quickly was that, don't finish the plate of food too fast because instantly you're gonna turn around and there's gonna be another, they're gonna heap it on you, and I don't have a tremendous appetite, so, 2 or 3 plates was enough for me, so I had to learn to pace myself and yet be respectful and say, "Oh, this is fantastic. No, no, I'm good, thank you very much." So that was one practice that I stuck with me even after I came back. Another one I got into, I'd like to say that I kept this up. I really didn't because it's harder to do in New York City. But in India, I got into riding motorcycles. Bangalore is like a really massively chaotic version of New York City, right? In terms of the number of people and everything that's going on. And I found that the easiest way to get from where I lived to, where my office was, I noticed all these people are riding, two-wheelers, little scooters or motorcycles. And I thought, man, that's how I want to get around. But I don't want to just ride around on some, you know, boring ass bike. I saw this, really shiny one day, and I leaned out my car window and I asked that guy what it was. And he told me it was this motorcycle called a Jawa, which was like a Czechoslovakian motorcycle that they imported and then they started manufacturing in India. So I found a group of people that were, like part of a motorcycle club that was enthusiastic about those bikes. I had one restored and then I joined that club and rode all over
So you're a
South
biker gang
India.
member.
Yeah, yeah, man. I'm a member of a biker gang.
Holy
So
smokes.
so that
Did you
that was really awesome because I was the only white guy in that biker gang, and we had a lot of fun. And I bought a bike when I came back to New York, but I kind of quickly realized that it's not a great way to get around in the city, and the subway is just much easier.
Yeah. I
uh,
was stationed in the Philippines and it's kind of like the same traffic. I always had the rule I saw was the largest vehicle wins. And as you're on it, you're on the right side, left side, the buses ruled the path. And it
Yeah.
a little jeepneys going around and a little cycles going around. And it was just sort of chaotic when I got stationed there. And kind of like you, I got there and I first thinking, oh my gosh, what I get myself into? Because I'm out there alone now, right? I'm half the world away from my parents and my family and all my support system.
Yeah.
I do have the military and everything else, but it was just an eye-opening experience, in a taxi cab and I see a volcano and all these different,
That's awesome.
third world country as far as living conditions but I grew up a lot there. So
Yeah.
for me, I don't know if I learned things to do there I could take it here, except I learned the value of things more than what
Uh-huh.
I missed from back home or what I wasn't able to do or how hard people's lives they had, and didn't have those same problems. So, but, you know,
Yeah.
in respective family, first thing I did is call my mom, dad, said, I love you, and when I left, it was like, oh, I can do this on my own. I'm a big boy, but yeah, yeah.
Fantastic experience. Yeah, there's nothing like travel to widen your perspective.
Traffic is bad though, man.
It's almost the exact opposite of the US. I always tell people, they say, "Oh, you rode a motorcycle? Are you crazy?" I said, here's the thing. In the US, we have traffic laws. They got traffic laws over there too, right? But Over here, 99 times out of 100, you can expect that people are going to obey the traffic laws. So
Mhm.
what does that engender? You tune out. You can eat while you're driving, you can check your makeup, you can fiddle with your phone, right? Because you assume that everybody's going to follow the rules. Exact opposite over there. Nobody follows the rules. So everybody has to be a hyper aware driver or you'll be dead, right?
Right.
So, there was nothing more. I loved riding the motorcycle there because it was you are 100% focused on that activity. You can't think about anything else. I mean, some people I think would find that stressful, but you know, I liked being able to just focus on one thing, right? And it's a completely different experience here. You can take a phone call while you're driving and, assume
So
that somebody's going to stop at a red light for you.
you are in a city that is a more complicated, massive, chaotic version of New York City, which for me, having visited like a year or two ago, is really impossible for me to imagine. I think I can see the link to sim racing. I think that it's starting to become more clear on how this
That's a
is a
good segue.
passion. And especially, I mean, kudos and hats off to you on taking that, like making the jump for that experience.
Mm.
I have to hear about the sim racing, how, how you got started. What do
Sure.
you enjoy about it? What's your setup? I
Yeah.
just imagine you must have 40 monitors and it must be hooked up to a real motorcycle or something. How,
Well, so for those of you that don't know that are listening, sim racing, what is it? Simulated racing. It's basically, video game simulation with typically car racing, right? So, I'm a child of the 70s and 80s. I grew up playing video games on Pong and Atari and Nintendo and all that jazz, and I never gave it up. I'm mid 50s and I still enjoy gaming, right? But this is the type of gaming that I've been into for the last few years, right? And, to your point and my telling of that story about being hyper focused on driving, I enjoy I've always enjoyed cars. I've enjoyed driving when it's, not just a point A to point B sort of experience. I always tried to find a route that was more interesting, whether it was, you know, all those times I had to move myself back and forth during college. I would take the, longer winding road than the boring ass interstate to and from school or work commutes. I would always find a route in my little sports car that were more interesting to drive. That being said, probably some of you listening are familiar with the Netflix series Drive to Survive, which is like this reality show about Formula One drivers. I got into that when that started a few years ago and I started following Formula One racing. I mean, I love so much about it. I love the team aspect, I love the strategy aspect, I love the technical aspect as far as development of the cars go. I love the individual athleticism of the drivers themselves, and so that really kind of captured my imagination. I hadn't been doing a lot of prior to the few years prior to that. I was focused on more adult things like raising kids and a career and all that, but not having an outlet for the types of fun driving that I used to enjoy when I lived in places like Bangalore or in California, where driving was more than just a point A to B experience that it typically is in New York. I have a car in New York, but most of the time I get around on the train. So I wanted to experience that fun again. Sim racing allows me to do that, right? You have software, you have hardware. What's the hardware consist of? I wish I was at home or I would show it to you, but it's like a extruded aluminum cockpit with, like a real car seat and then some equipment that looks like a steering wheel and pedals and a gear shift and all that. And you mentioned, I must have 40 monitors. I used to have several monitors, but, for the last couple of years, I've been doing VR sim racing. So I just put this ridiculous looking headset on and I'll tell you, if you've not experienced it, it's amazing. It's like you're sitting in the car.
and
Wow.
you don't get like nauseous or sick or motion
You
sick
you
in
you,
that?
you just got to push through that, Steel.
No.
I did get nauseous for the first probably week, and then there's some techniques that you can do to, overcome that nausea. Do short sessions, make sure you're cool, have a fan blowing on you, stop when you feel sick, and then, after a week or 2, I didn't feel sick anymore, and I can, I could do it for hours. I don't do it for hours at a time. I probably do it for an hour at a time. But yeah, it's really, really fun.
Are there any like
That's
leagues
wild.
or events that you like join for this?
Yeah, there's definitely leagues and events. There's several sim racing software titles that are pretty popular and platforms. iRacing is one. Gran Turismo on console is another one. Whether you like oval track racing or NASCAR style or Formula style, off road style, you can indulge in any of those. And the physics of the particular cars are all very different. So you gotta learn to drive differently depending on what different type of cars you're sitting in. In addition to the immersion factor that the VR gives you just sitting in there, right? I mean, the pedals rumble, the steering wheel, the feedback as go over curbs and, put on the brakes and you can feel, the car loading up the front. It's, it's really great. And the other thing that I've noticed over the winter months is that it does wonders for my, what's that acronym for you get depressed in the wintertime?
Oh,
Seasonal
sad.
affective SAD. There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
Seasonal affective disorder. You can put these goggles on and, no matter how dark and depressing it is in the wintertime in New York, you're on a sunny mountain road and
My
you're
Sad. Get
driving.
my mind is going because I got a grandson. He's only 8 months, 9 months old, but I'm thinking, how early can I get him? Yeah, my wife probably wouldn't put up with me having it as a hobby because I have enough different things that I
You
do.
got enough hobbies already, Brian, but
Exactly, but now if I get my grandson involved, it's about him and what he wants.
there you go.
I find
There
a way.
you go. Well, we could unpack that later, but yes,
Exactly.
great, good hobby is you could turn them into a real race car driver
There you
someday.
go. There you go.
Yeah, I had Gran Turismo 1 on PlayStation, and then I would play NASCAR 2000, I think it was, or 2002. And I, for some reason, I just didn't like the competitive nature of racing around the track. So I would turn backwards at the start of the race and just crash into the cars. And as long as you never pressed X, it wouldn't repair your car. And so the challenge was always to get the car completely in the red before the game forced your reset.
Well,
Didn't do that in
they
Gran
have
Turismo.
games that are all about there's
Yeah,
one
like
called
flat out.
Breakfast that is all about just, demolition and doing that sort of thing. So no matter what your, you know, driving fancy is, you can indulge it. If either of you get the opportunity to try, sim racing or VR sim racing, if you got a friend or a colleague that's into that nearby, give it a go.
Yeah,
Is there anything you've done special on your own, maybe in development, or is there not really opportunities for that? I'm just thinking of being able to build or customize or anything that on top. I think of stealing his Raspberry Pi ideas, that kind of idea, but taking something like this and the customizations, is there any opportunities there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are from a software perspective. You could probably, do some interesting things with some of the titles, the PC based ones there. But where people really go nuts is that the hardware side of things, and this is where like any first world hobby it gets expensive, pretty quickly because if you want to up your immersion factor, oh well, now you've got to have a wheel with a stronger motor. Or you've got to, have wind simulators that you can build, and people 3D print all sorts of stuff and attach it to these rigs.
Wow.
They build whole cockpits that look like real cars with, 300, if they're not using VR, like, 4 or 5 monitors to, give you that complete panoramic view, and they've got seatbelt tensioners, right? That will simulate if you go around corners, it's going to tighten the seatbelt on another side to make you feel like you're, sitting in a car that's going around the corner, right? So all sorts of, extra goodies that you can, bolt onto your your sim racing rig to increase that immersion factor and drain your bank account.
So we may have to bring him back still and just talk about sim racing.
Yeah, at least you don't have to pack it up into like a truck and bring it to another place where it's all just a bunch of folks sim racing.
That's how I justify it. I could get into real racing and wreck real cars and, spend hundreds of dollars on a weekend, but nah, I can spend a couple thousand on this hobby. I can drive any car I want. I can crash it as much as I want. And, I can just
Re-
take off my
re-
goggles and
You're back
walk away.
again.
It's perfect.
So, kind of going on from that a little bit further, what does your home lab setup look like, and how is it a
Yeah.
time?
Yeah, so I'll just start by saying, why do I like home labbing? Well, I'm an IT guy like you guys, and it isn't just something that I enjoy thinking about or doing, for what pays the bills during the 9 to 5. I enjoy playing around with technology, in my off hours too. So, much to my wife's chagrin, I've got a whole corner of the basement with all this gear that I've collected and over the years, good deals that I've found or castaways and things like that. What do I do with it? These days, I do a couple of things. I do like some, I'll say work related education where we want to play around with some new technology. And, we've got plenty of ways to do that inside the company that I work for, but sometimes it's nice to just have your own equipment to play with, right? So, I learned Red Hat OpenShift in the home lab. I took a bunch of, mini PCs and networked them up and made a OpenShift cluster and started delving into some microservices on OpenShift. That the other thing I do is try to bring in, we pay so much for services as tech consumers, whether you're, paying for extra storage on iCloud or Google Drive or, organizing your photos or things like that. These are all services that you can run self-hosted on your own if you have the right infrastructure. I enjoy doing those sorts of things, right? I have network attached storage to keep other copies of files that I want to keep track of or photographs that I busted out all my storage on Google Photos so I can bring those down locally and serve them up. Media, that's another one. Movies, TV shows, those sorts of things. You can rip all your DVDs and then serve them out. I'm stuck in this hotel room and in another state every week, so I can access my media remotely. That's something I
That's
enjoy
cool.
doing and sharing.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's what's driving me crazy is the notifications after 15 gigs. Your mail's full. It's going to stop working now.
Yeah. Well, you can self-host it, but it's I will say it's a labor of love. To get to tweak things and get them how you want them, and then I also try to apply enterprise best practices to the home lab, which you know often necessitates thinking about things that you don't have to think about if you pay Google to host your photos. You don't have to think about resiliency and backup and all those things, which you do. If you're going to bring that stuff inside, you better darn well think about it, or you could be, oops, one click
Yeah.
away from deleting everything, right?
Vacation pictures are gone. Sorry, honey.
Oops. I don't know.
What
I don't know what
I
happened.
guess when you think about your home lab, are there any projects that kind of pushed your troubleshooting skills, or are there any hidden gems that you would say hardware, software, or open source tools
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you
So
recommend?
when I started doing home labbing in the last couple 3 years, there was a big shift away from doing things that were kind of legacy application based installs to container based installs, and I didn't have really any experience with doing any container and based services in my IT career up
Is
to
that
that
like
point.
installing something inside a box? What's a container?
A container is a kind of compartmentalized, self-contained place for you to run your applications that's completely portable, right? So if, folks on the call are familiar with virtualization, which encapsulates an operating system and emulates all the hardware in that operating system, and you can, install whatever applications on top of that virtualized operating system. Containers are, different paradigm for that shares some elements of the host operating system with that container, but maintains that portability. So like kind of like lighter weight virtualization. And that was something that, like I said, wasn't familiar with. Tested my, kind of orchestrate all those things and get those up and running in a way that I liked and was repeatable. And, I now, however, I've come to rely on those things in, just like the way I rely on, services that I pay for. And so I've had to develop, this is my development portion of the home lab and this is the production one. And, the one that I rely on, my wife relies on, folks that I share some things with rely on, and I don't mess with that, or at least I try not to until I've tested out whatever new theory I have on the lower environment.
That's good. You've got some safety precautions in there, kinda treating it from an enterprise perspective. That's awesome.
Yeah, and that's good learning too, right? Because
Mhm.
you get an appreciation for things that, a bigger business is trying to do, and, you know, if it's that hard or, it's not that easy rather, just
Right.
just trying to keep 2 or 3 services up in your home and what it takes to do that in a way that, isn't completely risky and scary to do. You think about scaling that up 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times, for business critical things that an enterprise would have to do. It's a good learning.
Well, thanks, guys. Any final thoughts on things as we close up this episode?
I've just enjoyed sharing my perspectives with you all on, things that I'm passionate about with, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Great having you on here, Steele.
Thank you. Thank you, Toby. I'm gonna have to go play with the home lab. I'm feeling inspired on that. Try and set up a cluster and see what happens, what trouble I can get into.
So much trouble, but fun.
Well,
Awesome.
this episode's been packed with some stories, some tips to inspire listeners, whether you're charting a global career or launching at home tech project, but or even gunning for the virtual platform. I want to thank everybody for joining me today and listening, and those listening in, and I'll see you next time on the Wire Garage with Pops.
Awesome.